Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers is a weekly program designed to answer all your questions, including the ones you didn't even know you had, and to clarify the endless debates around the wonderful and fascinating world of sexuality. Join us for real talk about sex from two experts in the field. Richard and Larry Siegel have over 50 years of experience as sex therapists, educators, counselors, and researchers. The Siegel Brothers are recognized around the world as trainers of medical and mental health professionals.
Hello and welcome to Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. I'm Ricky Siegel, a certified sex therapist and supervisor.
And I'm Larry Siegel, a clinical sexologist and certified sexuality educator.
And my super awesome big brother.
It is my favorite role.
Cheers to you.
Cheers.
With our ritual sake toast.
Yes.
We thank you for joining us on Sex Talk this week. That was a multi-purpose toast.
Yes.
Toasting you, toasting our dear viewers, toasting our new president-elect.
Indeed.
We're toasting, hopefully, the beginning of the end of this crazy, crazy year.
Yeah, hopefully not the beginning of a new craziness.
I'm really worried about people misbehaving over Thanksgiving and Christmas.
Yeah.
People need to stay home. Think of the next Thanksgivings to come.
Yeah,
Don't
exactly.
get crazy about this one and think you have to travel and put people at risk.
And
Airplanes are going to be too crowded.
Please do not think that doing what we need to do to stay safe and to keep each other safe is in any way an infringement on any kind of personal rights.
You know, has there ever been any other public health issue, right? Would anybody get away with getting pulled over by a cop for not wearing a seatbelt and saying, my body, my choice.
Yeah.
You can't make me wear a seatbelt. Yeah, we can.
Right.
Right?
That's right. That's exactly
not
right.
Not just about your ass, it's about everybody else is on the road that you're a threat to.
Right. And where were these same mask phobes? You know, how come they're not also hitting the street, especially when we talked about HIV and we talk about condoms? Where is this don't tell me to wear condoms nonsense?
Well, I mean, there's plenty of those people.
Well, I don't want to wear one.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
but
different.
we don't have a law that says you have to. Right?
I mean, we have local, okay, you're right. We don't have a law because it's not as transmissible.
But here, it's been so bad that governors have had to pass laws that people go, screw you.
Right.
You can't make me.
Right. And why do governors have to pass laws? Because people can't be trusted to make good decisions, especially when it comes to protecting other people. And the irony here is that these people are proving that point time and time again. Why do we have laws? Because these people require us to have laws.
Yeah. Let's take a drastic turn to sexier talk, shall we?
Yes, absolutely.
Very
absolutely.
Nice. Yeah.
Excited. We have a great guest this week.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Can't wait for that, and can't wait to share that conversation with you all.
Yes, let's tell them right now. Tonight we have the honor of speaking with this wonderful man, Dr. Steve Snyder. Well, this is a book, not a man, but he wrote this book that is called Love Worth Making: How to Have Ridiculously Great Sex in a Long-Lasting Relationship. And this is a fantastic book. I have to admit, I have not read his first book, Primates of Park Avenue. Perhaps I'll get a chance to do that.
What he wrote about, he's a political writer?
I don't know.
Oh, I thought that was about Trump.
Yeah, I think that was before. But this is a wonderful book and a really important topic because, as the book points out, the whole industry, there's no shortage of sex info online, magic creams and pills and everything focused on function and performance.
Performance.
And that's not the problem that most people have, right? The problems that most people bring to sex therapists, yes, a lot of them are about function. And more often than not, sex therapists are educating their patients to stop thinking so much about function, right? But this is truly a problem. I'd have to admit and confess that even as a sex therapist, I feel like those cases where the desire's just gone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, those couples, it's a universal language that couples use, right? People say, I love her, or I love him, right?
Right, exactly.
We're
But we're not
just
in
not
love.
in love anymore,
Yeah.
and everybody knows what that means. That
Right.
means they're not screwing anymore. They're not going anywhere. Nobody's having an affair. They're rooted, you know, they've nested,
Right.
but they're just not.
Or even
lovers
if they are still engaging in some kind of sexual activity, it's perfunctory.
Yeah, absolutely. That,
Right.
routine, obligatory, perfunctory, and resentful.
Yeah.
And that's a slide no couple
Exactly.
can survive or
Yeah.
should ever go down. But it seems like that's the natural progression, right? You talk about this a lot. How the honeymoon, like going down a hill in a wagon, you don't have to apply any energy.
That's right.
It's just on its own inertia, and it's all wee.
That's
right?
exactly right.
But where do you go from there?
That's right. When that momentum wears out, and now it's at a point where you have to generate the energy for that relationship.
Right. And sometimes you got to put a foot out and push and get yourself rolling again.
Exactly.
And then maybe you get some momentum.
Right. And you're absolutely right when you said before that even for seasoned sex therapists, I don't know that there really are more difficult issues than to help people generate desire.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
It's it's stupid analogy, and I apologize, but it's the first one that came to my head, so it's going to come out of my mouth. But when you look at a lot of these, Naked and Afraid, all these survival shows, what's the most difficult thing most people have to do? Start a fire. Right? So the initial
That's
energy.
not a silly analogy. That's really good.
So, all right, well,
Yeah.
I take that back. I've thought about that a lot and very deeply. But that is the most difficult thing to do, especially when you're trying to do that for somebody else. You're trying to help somebody else create
and
that.
Dr. Snyder talks about that too. There's a point in the book where a guy's saying, there's a chapter called Your Wife's Not a Lawnmower. You know how guys just get frustrated and pulling that cord and trying to get the engine to catch. And the guy says to him, but how else am I supposed to get her wet? And he says, it's simple. You don't. It's not your job.
That's right.
You sit back and enjoy what's going on. And if she's enjoying what's going on, she'll get wet.
Yeah.
But it's like, what do I do to get him hard? What do I do to get her wet? Oh my God, sex isn't working. Yeah, because you're working too hard. It's not supposed to be work. It's supposed to be play. It's supposed to be fun.
That's
and
right.
Unbridled pleasure and uninhibited, unself-conscious fun.
Absolutely.
But that's not the message we get growing up.
No, it really isn't. And again, that perspective is an important one. People have to realize that it's not supposed to be work. It really is that framing for so many people. And the other thing I think too that Dr. Snyder does address, very well, that people really need to understand is that sexual play, sexual activity is something we do with our partner. We got to get out of that framing that it's something we're doing to our partner.
And we're talking to you guys.
Especially.
That is in the script. Guys, too many guys, well, there are too many guys that just don't care. They don't understand female sexuality. They don't understand how women have orgasm, and they don't care because their script says get it up, get it in, get it off, get it out, get a snack or something, right? But the guys that care too much, like remember when we were talking to Dr. Karen from Kingston, right? When a woman complains that she didn't enjoy the sex, the guys say, oh, "What do you want from me? Didn't you see how much I was wailing away there?" Well, maybe she didn't want you wailing away.
Exactly.
Right? But guys have to understand how to be better lovers.
Indeed. And that really is the bottom line.
And that's what a book like this, that's what makes it stand out from the hundreds of sex books that are out there.
Indeed. Especially in the context of long-term relationships. We take for granted how many people just accept it as the way it's supposed to be, that after a while it's supposed to get platonic. The passion's supposed to go away.
Well, yeah, that's just wrong. That's the domesticating that. Another star in New York City, Esther Perel, talks about the domesticated marriage in her book Mating in Captivity. Let's see if we can get her on the show.
Yeah, I think we should. Yeah.
But now let's not waste any more time. Let's get to our discussion with our guest, Dr. Stephen Snyder. Sorry about that, Steve. And once again, he's the author of Love Worth Making, How to Have Ridiculously Great Sex in a Long-Lasting Relationship. And we'll be right back with that interview. And we're back, as promised, with the good Dr. Snyder. Steve, good to see you.
Yes,
Good to see you
indeed.
guys.
Welcome.
Thank you again. Welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
Uh,
I thought you'd never ask.
Oh, we're really, really honored to have you.
Yes,
I've,
very much so.
Finally got the call from Florida.
Yes, yes, yes. As we said in the intro, your latest book, I promised that one of these days I'm going to read Primates of Park Avenue. I've never even seen it.
That's a good book.
I really, yeah. I just love your style. But we talked about love worth making, how to have ridiculously great sex in a long-lasting relationship. So,
As you may have gathered, Love Worth Making is my title, and How to Have Ridiculously Great Sex in a Long-Lasting Relationship is the publisher's title, but that's the way it goes.
Yeah,
of course,
yes.
they want to sell lots and lots of books. Yeah. So let's just start with a broader question about how this book came to be and why. I mean, I know why I recommend it as often as I do, but why for people watching and listening, of all the sex books on the shelf, why did you write this one?
Well, came to be like a lot of books because it didn't exist. I looked and looked and looked for it, but couldn't find it. I looked for a book that talked about sexual feelings. And there's lots of books about, like, how to have a threesome and how to tie your partner up. I mean, it's an amazing number of books on how to tie your partner up with rope and stuff. But not many people are really into that kind of stuff. And yet that's what they get. Are you meant for non-monogamy, or should you be considering toys and stuff like that? And it's ridiculous, because what most people want to do is they just want sex is going to make them feel good. So I decided to write a book about just regular, ordinary old sex. It's not like all these variations, and it's just regular, ordinary sex, mostly heterosexual couples, although there's a couple of gay and lesbian couples in there. So it's like 90% of the world. They're just like, middle brow, just regular old people just want to have plain old good sex. And one of the other reasons I wrote it is because so many of the sex books are kind of adventure oriented. They have to do with stretching your sexual boundaries, or maybe getting tantric or something. That's ridiculous.
Having a little kink to your relationship.
Most people just want to have just regular old good sex. And so I decided to try and write a book that wasn't like leftist and it wasn't conservative. On the other hand, it was just right in the middle of the road. And it just talked about sexual feelings, just the things that make people feel good. And so what I had to do initially was to come up with a vocabulary for describing sexual arousal, because you guys know, as sex therapists, that's where all the action is, in sexual arousal. And if you're really aroused, it doesn't matter what else you do, it's good sex.
Right.
So what is sexual arousal? Masters and Johnson, they studied the physiology, but how do you study the psychology? Mostly just ask people. And so I asked people for decades, okay, what does it feel like? What does it feel like? What does it feel like? And I came up with 3 categories of things that tend to happen with people when they're sexually aroused. The first is people get absorbed. So this leads into the whole mindfulness idea. So good sexual arousal is really a mindful experience. The second is people regress, which is not something you hear about in the sex therapy literature. People become more childlike. They become more primitive.
Wow.
You're really into your partner, but you really don't want to hear all about their day. You just want it to make nice noises and tell them that you're wonderful. You're like a 3-year-old stuffing your mouth with ice cream at a party, and you want everybody to go, yay. That's basically the regressive levels. People are aroused when the phone rings and they don't give a damn who's calling. They just want them to go away. So they're regressed. And then the third is validation. It's just something that people feel that, yeah, that's me. That's a strong sense of identity. That's why people who are gay can have sex with the opposite gender, but it doesn't really give them that sense of validation, although everything might work. That's not it. So I summarizing all those things, I say it's about getting dumb and happy. So I don't really care what goes into what and what you do, whether you get an orgasm. As long as you get dumb and happy, I'm happy.
Yeah,
That's
nice. And on that regression point, I'm glad that that's like one of your 3 pillars, as you were almost kind of describing it, because I really love, there's quite a bit in your book, including a whole chapter on that idea that our sexual self is always a child.
It's always a child. And that's why how many love songs have the word baby in it. What is that about? It's regressive. And once you understand that, you understand why so much sex advice doesn't succeed, because it doesn't talk to the sexual mind. In my book, we have no figures. We have no facts or numbers. There's not a single number in the entire book. It's just meant to talk to the sexual mind. And the sexual mind doesn't know anything about numbers. And the sexual mind doesn't know anything about generosity because it's a 3-year-old level. 3-year-olds are not generous. They're selfish. You know, as I say in the book, I have a lot of trouble with the idea of giving somebody oral sex. It should be taking oral sex, you know? If you're taking oral sex, then the other person, hey, they don't have to worry about anything. They know you're taken care of. And the other thing that becomes apparent, if you think about the sexual mind as being infantile, is that it makes no sense to talk about working on your sexual relationship. I mean, every time I hear somebody talking about working on our sexual relationship, I don't want to barf. It's just ridiculous. Working has nothing to do with it. The sexual mind doesn't understand what work is any more than the 3-year-old understands what work is. Yeah. So if you're working on it, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, you're really turning so many standard rhetorical ideas on their head, and
I can't stand.
No. And I think, you know, this idea of, and I think you even cite Ian Kerner's book, She Comes First, but I like the way you also followed up what you were describing and really kind of this idea of sexual selfishness, this healthy narcissism.
Yes.
And,
I mean, that's the problem. You know, Ian had the same problem as I did when he published this book. His has sold a lot more copies, obviously, but he had the same problem because She Comes First, magnificent title. And then the publisher entitled it The Thinking Man's Guide to Pleasuring a Woman.
All right.
It's ridiculous. You don't want to pleasure a woman. You want to enjoy a woman. So anyhow,
right.
Personal bias.
You know, I've been so grateful to you for so many years, long before the book. I always learned from you. We've been grateful.
Likewise.
Privileged to have you teach for us at Modern Sex Therapy Institutes over many, many years.
I'm going to do it this year too.
You know, I always refer to you as a unicorn because you're
Thank you.
Yeah. You know, first of all, a psychiatrist that actually sits down and counsels their patients, and a sex therapist. So
unheard of.
You're really in a very, very small.
You're making me blush.
Yeah, but it's deserved. Thanks. Just such good stuff.
And then throw on the fact that you actually know your shit.
And don't treat with a prescription pad.
You're right.
Like you're supposed to be trained in med school, I guess.
Yeah.
So we were also talking recently, and we spent a couple of shows on it. We had Laurie Mintz, who, of course, you know, wrote Becoming Clitorate, Why Orgasm Equity Matters and How to Achieve It. And then we were just kind of talking as guys, mostly to other guys, about how woefully ignorant they tend to be about female sexual response and
their own.
Yeah, and very poor clitoracy. And I know I've heard you speak a number of times about our kind of missing the point of, we need to understand our parts and genitalia and how they're similar and how they're different. But could you pick up on just, you know, the physiological then becoming the...
Well, I think I would like to very much. You know, masculinity is in evolution. It's been said that the biggest event of the 20th century was the economic and social empowerment of women. Huge. I mean, 100 years ago, they gave women the right to vote, only 100 years ago. And so women have come a long way, to state the obvious. And it's been said that the big event of the 21st century is going to be men figuring out what to do with that. Because it's not at all clear. You know, the 20th century sex problem extraordinaire was women's loss of sexual desire. Guys, you know, not tonight, dear, I have a headache. Guys bringing their wife in saying she doesn't get turned on anymore. I see that, but I don't see it as much as I see the opposite these days. The woman dragging her husband in saying he's gone missing in bed. He's inert. And that's really the sexual problem of the 21st century. Now, how does that relate to becoming clitorate? I don't know exactly, but I always say you've got masculinity and evolution. You got masculinity 1.0. And masculinity 1.0, guy didn't know what a clitoris was, didn't particularly care. He would go in, he would get off, whatever. He wasn't really that connected with her pleasure. Right. Occasionally, I see a masculinity 1.0 guy. You know, Terry Real talks about those guys. But I don't see that many of those guys. Yeah. Mostly what I see is masculinity 2.0. And masculinity 2.0, the guys read Becoming Clitorate. and he's read She Comes First, and he knows all about the clitoris, and he can't wait to just give her oceans and oceans of pleasure in her clitoris. And she comes into my office and she goes, I'm bored out of my mind. I'm bored out of my mind because it's all generosity and there's no passion.
Yeah.
So masculinity 2.0 often are the sons of feminists, and they're very, very careful. They would never dream of not going down on a woman.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely required.
Right.
They would never insist that she give him oral sex, but they would never dream of withholding oral sex from her, even if they don't particularly like to do it, which I say in my book is a very big mistake.
Yeah.
I don't think you should do anything in sex if you don't particularly like to do it. If you don't, because obviously guys are on a spectrum. There's some guys that just love the vulva and it's just their thing. And they're the happiest guys in the world when their face is right up in the vulva, and they get disappointed when they have to have intercourse because their face is farther from the vulva. They can't stay down there. And at the other extreme are guys who are very turned on to their partners and they're very passionate, but it's just not their thing. You know, they'll swim in it, but they don't want to drink it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And the guys in the middle, a lot of guys I see in the middle who are kind of neutral on it. It kind of doesn't do really much of anything for them, but they know it's important and they like to hear her moan and so forth. And unfortunately for all these guys in the middle, they get told that they're supposed to perform this action. Right. And as we talked about, the sexual self doesn't know anything about performing action or doing what you're supposed to. It just wants to, eat ice cream and everybody say yay. And so unfortunately, a lot of these guys are losing their erections as they're doing cunnilingus because they're trying to achieve the goal and make sure that they're good 21st century men. And in the process, as I said, they're boring their partners to death. Mm-hmm. So in my book, what I do is I say, I really don't like the idea of giving somebody oral sex. It should be taking oral sex. And you should be taking oral sex from your partner selfishly. So that way your partner knows she's lying there and she knows he's getting exactly what he wants and needs. Now, if she wants to use that stimulation to have an orgasm, hey, fabulous, go for it. But I tell guys, you're not the soloist here. You're just the rhythm section.
Yeah.
So, you're just there just to provide, just going on with the bass, blah, 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 blah. You're happy and you're turned on. If you're turned on, great. She can do whatever she wants with it. Right. So it's a little bit of a differentiation in sex roles so that you're not there to please your partner. You're there to enjoy your partner. And really that's passion. Yeah. As I always say, you never see a romance novel where the hero rips off the woman's clothes and then said, okay, now tell me how you like to be touched.
Yeah.
It's important to know how she likes to be touched. You want to know it and then forget it. Right. You want to know it and then not think about it because you want to be able to regress and to be truly passionate. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyhow, long speech, but that's my feeling about it.
No, but that's such a great point too. And let me sort of maybe take you into a slightly different direction with that as well. That when we look at that performance orientation, especially for guys, and I think especially that sort of obsession with a woman's clitoris, how much of that is really about giving pleasure, that standard framing, giving pleasure to his partner, or how much of it is really trying to compensate for their own boredom and insecurity and thinking if they can make this happen, they're kind of off the hook.
Yeah.
How much of the ego is involved in that?
Well, I think there is ego involved, but there's always ego involved in sexuality because you're dealing with infantile self, which is highly narcissistic. Mm-hmm. And so there's ego involved with everybody. I mean, most women that I talk to, heterosexual women, they describe their favorite part of sex is with a couple of seconds before a partner comes. And there's just a couple of seconds where he just becomes totally helpless in her arms. Mm-hmm. And that is a big ego trip for most women. And they get very disappointed if they don't get that. Mm-hmm. So it's not just the men. The women have that ego trip too. So it's an issue that I think both genders struggle with because sexuality is just seems to be such a strong determinant of self-worth in ways that we don't really understand. Why should it be such a strong determinant of self-worth? You see somebody who's got everything in the world, but if he can't get his penis into his wife's vagina, he's the most miserable person in the world. It makes absolutely no sense.
Right. Right. And you write about that sort of, especially from a guy's perspective, but I know it's in, really in everybody, but you write about how so much of that process is seeking validation.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Once we feel, and I think maybe the partner's lack of desire is often felt as some kind of critical thing, which then feeds against or works against that sense of validation.
Oh my God, absolutely. Because the partner, in my book, I call this a sex knot. The partner lacks desire. The guy gets upset or the woman gets upset. And once you see your partner upset, then you're going to lack desire, because that's not a happy thing. Because, sex is all based on feeling happy. And so the minute you get that unhappy stuff getting in there, then you got trouble. And it can just echo back and forth between the two people.
Right. Yes,
That's really nice. So going back to this idea of clitoracy, right, and continuing that, especially, with guys learning how to be more clitorate, if they're not supposed to go and focus on the clitoris, right, how do we de-emphasize the focus on the clitoris and increase clitoracy?
I think it's like everything else when it comes to what most women would really value and prize in a man. And we're talking about heterosexual women, obviously. It's always a balance. You think of the kinds of things that women describe they want a man. They want a man who's dominant, usually, able to be dominant, but not domineering. Also has a soft side. Has a soft side, but he's not a pushover. He's sophisticated, but he's not like metrosexual. He's also a little bit of rough, he can be rough if he needs to. And he's sophisticated, but he's not effete. And so all these values, they always kind of drift into the middle, and they're balanced. It's like, women tend to evaluate men's kissing. It should be wet, but not too wet. It should be aggressive, but not too aggressive. It's just always that sweet spot in the middle. And I think when it comes to men's sexual behavior in general, there's that sweet spot in the middle where he's knowledgeable, but not like too obsessive and compulsive about getting the stroking exactly right. You get the feeling that he's not ultra technique theoretician, kind of thing. And he should be passionate, but still a little mindful. And so all these things, they're always this balance. You got to get the balance exactly right. And obviously there's a lot of mischief that can happen here because men get kind of mixed messages. They're supposed to be enlightened. They're supposed to be sensitive. They're supposed to listen. But as one of my favorite sex writers, Carly Sciortino, said, she said, I don't think any woman ever got off thinking about what a great listener her boyfriend is. So, there's other stuff too. It's always a composite. Whereas with men, it's so much simpler. We men tend not to need too much composite. We don't really need that much. We need a little something up above and we need a little something down below and we're good to go. Because most men are kind of like fetishists, they see what they like and they're good.
Right.
I one of my favorite characterizations of that is, and both for communication differences as well as a lot of these kinds of erotic differences, but women are like this cutting edge, most advanced NASA type of computer system, and guys are like an old set of rabbit ear antennas with tinfoil on the end.
Exactly. And I think it's fine. That one really bothers me a little bit because it kind of like makes men kind of seem a little more primitive. And there's so much of that these days. There's so, and you could do that. You can make a man seem primitive and it's funny. You make a woman seem primitive and it's not funny.
No, exactly.
So yeah, I think it's an easy pot shot at guys. But I think that the way I think about it is there are many schools of inquiry and lines of inquiry that lead to the conclusion that most women have a tremendous amount of erotic flexibility. In the matter of sexual orientation, this is called the sexual fluidity. In the matter of what a woman most often tends to enjoy about a partner, it's a erotic plasticity. Most women find that they could be with a guy, they're not so turned on to him initially, but if he behaves in a certain way and shows her really, really impressive things, they could get turned on to him. Very few guys, if they're not initially turned on to a woman, are going to get turned on to her. There are really differences there. And there's a tendency to kind of gloss over those differences in the sex therapy field. But I think what we do when we do that is we lose some of the clinical points which are most useful for people in the office. Men understanding how women really need to be desired. Most women I know would much rather feel desired than have somebody who's technically very good with the clitoris. I just don't see that many women complaining of the guy not being that good with the clitoris, but I hear lots of women complaining that they don't manifest desire in the way that they like.
Nice.
Good.
So how does one actually do that, especially if that is an issue in the relationship? How does one manifest desire?
Okay, so I talk a lot about this because the book is about long-term couples, sex in long-term couples, which, as the two of you know, is kind of the holy grail of sex therapy, how to make that happen.
Yeah.
Mm.
One of the reasons that I wrote the book, because obviously all these things are overdetermined, but one of the other reasons that I wrote the book is I got really tired of all the books that talked about, doing adventuring, pretend you don't know each other and meet at a bar. And, my patients all go, yeah, it would be very sexy if it wasn't my wife,
Right.
Or you should just, do some adventurous, take up a new hobby together. I've never seen anybody get hot from taking up a new hobby together, And so they're all different ways of trying to kind of jumpstart sexual desire. And just after decades doing this, I thought this is utter garbage. I don't think you can jumpstart sexual desire. So I go in a totally different directions. I say, screw sexual desire. Who needs it? You don't really need to feel desire in order to have good sex. All you need is openness to inspiration. So I take a lot from the mindfulness literature, and I invented a technique called the two-step. And the two-step, which is in chapter 6 and chapter 15 of my book, is an alternative to all that other stuff. The two-step is, instead of going to bed to have sex, you go to bed to do absolutely nothing. And so you're just hanging out in bed together. You might talk a little bit, not about anything in particular. And you might not even look at each other for a while. You might just kind of breathe and, get in touch with your feet. Because, who gets in touch with their feet? They're there, but we never talk to them. So you talk to your feet, you get in touch with your feet. You notice the temperature in the room and all that good mindfulness stuff. And then when you feel you've shifted from the state of doing and thinking, which most of us are in all the time, to the state of awareness, then you turn to your partner and you go, where am I to find inspiration here? And if you're like most of us, you've chosen somebody that you're basically attracted to and you like how God put them together, then you're going to find some inspiration. You may not have begun with desire at all, but if you're open to inspiration, it comes to you. And when you find inspiration, you go with it. And so it's a perfectly fine way of having sex and having really, really good sex without any desire at all. So people say, I don't have desire. I go, who cares? I mean, the classic sex therapy intervention is the sex date, which is meant to serve the same purpose. The problem I have with the sex date is you go to bed and you're supposed to have sex, but you don't really feel anything. So what I like about the two-step is you're not going to bed to have sex. You're going to bed to do absolutely nothing. And then you spend a couple minutes just tuning up and moving from thinking and doing to awareness. And then you're ready to go looking for inspiration.
Beautiful.
Now, I'm biased in this because I'm a religious man. And we religious people know that we lose desire as well. We lose religious desire. Every religious person knows that. Something that inspired you at one time, no longer because you've heard it 100 times. And so you go to your place of worship or on your own and you say, God, hit me with whatever you're going to hit me with. I don't know. And maybe I'll get a little desire, a little inspiration. Maybe I'll get a lot. I can't control it. And I'm just open to it. And it should be the same thing when you have sex.
Right. And that's really so key.
These talks always go by way too quickly, but this time we knew we were going to need a part 2, and we invited and Dr. Snyder graciously accepted to come back and continue this conversation in December.
Fabulous. Love to.
There's so many questions I have for you as a psychiatrist's perspective. I want to talk about sexual narcissism, and I want to talk about the one thing more than anything else that I've borrowed from you. I was always with proper attribution, of course, but this really tough. I mean, I preface it, and I'm talking about in a therapy session, with the knowing that it's a difficult ask. But that idea of not walking out, sulking, leaving the room if a partner respectfully declines sex, but to ask if you can just lie there next to them.
Oh, yeah.
One of the most brilliant things that I have used to such wonderful effect.
Absolutely. Because, people seek sex in a binary fashion. Are we going to go through the entire Masters and Johnson sex response cycle together? Right. Or are we going to do nothing? Right. And it's ridiculous. In my book, I call it lazy sex.
Yes.
He says, okay, you don't have sex. Can I have some lazy sex? I just give myself an orgasm while you just lie next to me and we'll kiss. I mean, there's nothing wrong with
But
that.
the alternative is guys sulk like 12-year-olds and go downstairs to the computer and jerk
exactly.
off.
And it's cold in that bathroom. Don't do that. Have it where it's warm. Yeah. And not only that, but you get like Pavlov's dog, because the signal to have an orgasm with your computer is like when your wife leaves the house or when she falls asleep. That's ridiculous. Now, when she comes into the house or when she wakes up, that's a negative sexual signal, because it means you got to turn off the computer. So much better to bring all the orgasms to bed with your spouse. Unfortunately, not everybody's comfortable with it. I tell people, I say, okay, if one of you is tired, the other could just have an orgasm in bed, and the other could just hold you or something like that. And half the couples, as you know, will turn to you and go, oh yeah, we do that all the time. And half the couples will say, look at, like, I got 3 heads. Are you kidding? That's crazy. As if once you get married, you lose the right to touch your own genitals, which is really totally weird.
Yeah, that's more good.
Yeah, we need to talk more about that
fodder
too.
for
Good. And we could talk about other dysfunctions as well, and prematurity and all sorts of stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Okay, fabulous. Well, thank you for having me, and I look forward to part 2 in December.
Yes, indeed.
Really,
Thank you so much.
Take care. Great to see you.
Well, same here.
So that was a lot of fun. He's a really brilliant guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again so much for doing this, Steve. We really appreciate it.
As I said, I really believe you're a unicorn. As rare as it is to find a psychiatrist that counsels their patients, but to find a psychiatrist who's also a sex therapist there's far too few, and you are a giant among your peers.
Absolutely, and a toast to that.
Yes. Oh, and we're going to have Dr. Snyder back again in December, so stay tuned for part 2.
Mm-hmm. So that is going to do it for us for this week's Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. I want to thank you for joining us tonight, and thank you for joining us every Friday night, and hopefully continuing to join us every Friday night at 7 p.m.
We'd be so grateful if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel and like our Facebook page and share with all your friends and spread the word for good sex talk.
Indeed.
Till next week.
Thank you, and stay well.
Thanks for watching Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. Join us each week on Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern. You can also follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay on top of the latest developments in the ever-changing world of sex and sexuality.